Oh, you fuck.
Oh, something bad happened there. That was
that was aggressive.
I heard just
Wow.
sounded like a robot told us to fuck off. Did you hear that?
I think I figured it out.
What was the problem?
Hang on. Okay.
Oh, fuck. That was awesome.
Someone, not me, had made the smart decision to plug their computer charger into the
tall
out
guy.
right next to the on-off switch of a power strip.
So it kept bumping it
Happens
off.
to be the power. The only other thing that's plugged into the power strip is my mixer. So I was like, my mixer's plugged in, but then I looked over and I was like, oh,
Yeah,
that's like it's just the pressure is just like slightly toggling the
thing on and off.
And there's like 4 other outlets that he could have used. So anyway,
we don't want to name any names.
That.
Brandon,
not gonna name any names. Not gonna name any names.
I wish you could have seen it from our side because it cut out right as you were cussing at it. So it just came through like
all we heard is like
yeah,
so we're getting swore at by a robot.
Right.
Yeah,
that sounds
nice.
Right.
Amy, we are keeping Wednesdays for the follow-up for one more Wednesday.
Mean.
Yeah. Yeah. So next week is going to be same bad time, same bad channel. And then I think after that, we're back to our Tuesday evenings, I believe is the plan.
Yeah. But if you want me to keep telling you, like, because for example, sometimes with the Avatar podcast, we might end up just recording on Tuesday and Thursday and not on Wednesday. And if that happens, do you want me to like, because I'll know ahead of time.
Yeah. Let me know. Because I mean, it's a little bit of a rush for me to get back from school, like right here at this time. But I love the fact that when we're done, it's 5 o'clock and like Zach can go home and have dinner with his kids, and I can go have dinner and go to the gym and have the evening. Although, because the other way, like we get done at 9 o'clock. Zach and I sit around and bullshit till 9:30, and then he's got to drive a half hour home.
Totally.
And it's past my bedtime. Man, this weekend up at the conference, everybody kind of gets together and goes out for drinks in the evenings afterwards. And so Sunday night, we all went out and we had dinner, and then we had some drinks. We sat around just shooting. People that we like, coworkers that I don't generally have time to sit around and really chat with, plus other people from the county that are there that we're chatting with. Went to bed at like 11:30 at night. Had probably 5 beers, and I don't hardly ever drink.
Ooh, 5 beers seems like a lot.
Yeah, for me.
For you not drinking, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I wasn't drunk or anything, but
what kind of beer were you drinking? That's the question.
The champagne of beers.
Oh,
Miller High Life. They didn't have my beer. I like Coors Banquet, the original, but they didn't have it.
Did you say Coors Banquet?
Yeah.
That's what it's called?
Yeah.
Original Coors is Coors Banquet?
Yep.
Somehow I've never heard that. Or more likely, I just didn't care enough to remember.
Right. But now you know. They come in the little medicine bottles, the little short, little stubby bottles.
Oh, yeah. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Banquet.
But so I went with the High Life, the champagne of beers, as it says right on the label.
I don't know why it says that. It took me a long time. Like someone told me that, and I was like, "What?"
Well, Nate, my buddy Nate, he got his with a lime in it. Or no, I just ordered a High Life, and they brought it because it was the only because I was in the mood for just some hillbilly cheap beer. They didn't have my Coors, they didn't have any Busch Light, so I went with the High Life. And she brought it had a lime in it, and I thought she screwed up. And he's like, "No, a lot of people drink it. Well, it tastes like a Corona when you put a lime in it."
Mm-hmm.
It was pretty good.
Like, if I like Corona, I would have ordered a Corona.
Well, the Miller High Lives were $1 a bottle that night on special.
I'm sure there's plenty of things I would put a lime in that I would not enjoy the taste. But if there's a difference between like, hey, some people like this with a lime, like I probably will also like it with a lime. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it was good.
Double Tito's tonic tall with a lime.
Mm-hmm.
That's my drink.
But the next morning, I got up. Nate and I went. We met at like 7. We're the only 2 early risers in the group, so like we went and met at like 7 o'clock to the Starbucks to get a coffee before we went into the thing. And I was just like, man, I'm not feeling great at all. And he's like, what? He's like, you weren't even drinking. Just had a handful of beers, like your friend. I was like, I'll be honest, Nate. 2 things. 1, I don't drink, so 5 beers is a lot for me. 2, I'm usually asleep by 9:30 at night. He's like, what? I was like, I was like, just getting back to the hotel at 11:30 was more than my body was capable of handling.
Yeah.
Like I'm usually in. Was that start? Becky and I used to always go to bed at 11. And then like we started, like, we'll go to bed at like 10:30 and we can watch something, go to bed at 11. Then it was like, well, we'll go to bed we'll try to get a little more sleep, especially when I start on like first form really focuses on your sleep too, like getting a solid 7 hours of sleep every night. It's like, well, let's go to bed at 10 so that we're done watching our show by 9:30. And then it kind of somehow it turned into I want to be asleep by 10. And then then it's like we'll turn the TV on. An episode of whatever we're watching will end at 9:30. We're like, we don't want to start another because if we start that, it won't be done until 10. Then it will be 10:30. So yeah, we're in bed by 9:35.
My entire family in bed by 9 o'clock. All of us.
Oh, that's great. I used to make fun of Mary because we always Becky and I.
Yeah, you made fun of us all the time.
Yeah, because we were always up till like at least 11 o'clock at night. And now, yeah, I'm not in bed by 9, but by 9:30, I'm in bed.
Nope. If Bob or Becky text us after 9 o'clock, it gets responded to about 6 a.m.
Yep, game
There
over.
you go.
We're done.
There you go.
Mm-hmm. Can someone point out to Bob that I need him to start giving us clues on the next season
Point it out.
try to work so I can try working out what the case is.
I'll tell you right now. It was in the library with a candlestick.
Cool.
There's your clues. Like
From the game. It's a clue joke.
From the game through. We did it.
I mean, I knew it was a clue joke, but I forgot that you really emphasized clue.
Colonel Mustard.
Yeah.
Colonel Mustard.
Now I understand it's a clue joke. Because
That's it.
Janet added in.
God. I hate
Uh,
that you're my best friend.
yeah.
I love you, but I hate you.
yeah. Who said that? Valeria. I cannot give away until I can't even give hints until I have the full go ahead. Like, it's awesome that this particular person has like a big legal team behind them. But that also like creates a bit of a bureaucracy where like the head attorney is like, hell yeah, pitches it to the group of the team of attorneys, and they're all like, hell yeah, they take it to the person. I almost just said the name.
Oh my God. That would have been so amazing.
It was on the tip of my
That would have
tongue.
been incredible.
Yeah. But they took it
that's
to the
so funny.
person in prison
Oh.
who said hell yeah, and then they emailed me. They're like, it looks like so that, like they've given us the case files, we're working on it, but they're like, now they got to run it by whoever their bosses are at the law firm to make the final decision.
Here's what I know, Valeria. Bob said it's within a few hours of here, which means it could be in
Several
5 states or Canada.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
we are right on the
Very
corner
smart.
there. Yeah.
So
Very sneaky.
that's how much I know.
Yeah, it could be in Iowa, could be in Illinois, could be Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Could be
This is
Canada.
a
could be
fun story. You
Minnesota,
should tell that to what was the name of the person you're working with for this next season?
Their name. It's a wild one. It's a wild one. Looking forward to it. It's gonna be a tricky one, man. I'll tell you this. There's a lot of layers. Like, think Pinion Pines layers to not quite like that,
Okay.
much more direct, but only one defendant. I'll tell you that. Only one defendant. Multiple victims. Multiple locations.
Wow. Okay. Jeez. Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, Israel
All
Keys.
right.
I said, don't say it.
God.
Just to be clear,
Wait,
you
what?
just made a joke.
Who made a joke?
I guess that you're working for the dead Israel Keys to prove his innocence.
Yeah.
We've reached an all-time low.
Sorry.
Then I would be the thing that all the trolls always say, the innocence frauds. Like, Israel's
That's right. You'll make anyone in. You'll make anyone innocent. Okay, I guess we better get started. It's
Oh, I have to check the plumbing real fast. I'll be right back.
great.
Ugh.
Great.
Knee hurts, back hurts, ankle hurts.
Oh,
Janet, just be happy you don't live here. Like,
I go back and forth. Especially because I was just talking about, obviously the fires. You just
yeah.
have enhanced versions of conversations that many of us are already having about climate change and stuff. And Michigan is supposed to be a real sweet spot. It's like it's not going to be it's not being affected, and it's not expected to be affected by climate change. In the same way that many other places, Montana too, those are kind of like little Goldilocks areas where you kind of get what you have now. So if you're a person who can't stand winter weather, you're possibly not, you're moving to Michigan to get more of the same, but
Yeah.
still, I don't know.
No, I mean, it is gorgeous here. I mean, I make fun of it,
beautiful.
but it's more that
Yeah.
than.
Yeah.
Listen, if you were closer, you know how much you'd have to deal with him.
I know.
That
I
right
know.
there. Huh?
I know. I get such a nice
know.
limited
I
sliver
know.
of.
Your 2 hours a week is like perfect.
Yeah.
Like, oh, do you see what happens to me?
Yeah, that seals it. That
Do you
seals
see
it.
that? That could have been you. I saved you.
Yeah,
That
I
could have
know.
been
It
you.
probably would have been me.
Could have been me.
Yeah. Oh, welcome back.
Sorry, Zach.
Oh, he just made so many of our points that we were making while you were gone. You just came in and closed the
I wasn't even
deals.
listening. What are you guys talking about?
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay, we gotta end this. We gotta end the pregame. It's not this. You guys are fine. It's the pregame people listening to this tomorrow. We'll talk to you guys next week. We love you,
Wait, is that tomorrow?
pregamers.
Goodbye, pre-gamers.
Gamers.
Bye, pregamers.
I said bye.
Again?
Oh, Erica did a
Bye
really good
again.
job with these questions.
Stupid.
Stupid.
All right. And we're ready to hit record on the big show. Oh, by the way, how did you like my little outline I made? I wrote it for you. I gave Erica the day off because I was out of town, and
Oh, you wrote it. Oh man, I wish. Okay, good. Then everyone who just heard me say Erica did a good job on that, forget that you heard me say
Wait,
that.
did you say I did a great job on it?
No.
No, I had already told her to take the day off, and then you were like, I was like, I'll just throw it together in my lunch break.
No, it's great. I was just quickly scanning it to make sure, because I had written down some of my own notes, and so I'm just looking to see if they're repeated, so I don't like get out in front of a perfectly wonderful listener's way of putting something the same
Well,
way.
it's not, because I did not do the thing where I just quoted what they said. I just said they want to know, so I took like the big long
Gotcha.
paragraph and made it into.
Gotcha.
Because that's the way I would do it, and I'm a control freak.
Okay. All right.
Ready to hit
Great.
record whenever you are.
Yeah. All right. Totally ready. And in fact, I have now hit record.
I have also now hit record. Zach, did you hit record?
I hit
Wonderful.
record.
1, 2, 3.
Ahoy, friends. Thank you for tuning into Truth and Justice. You are listening to the Friday follow-up for Season 16, Episode 7. This week, Bob sat down for a discussion with Lauren Bright Pacheco and Bob Mata about their podcast, Murder on Songbird Road. This investigative podcast about the murder of 11-year-old Jade Beasley in Marion, Illinois, and the possible wrongful conviction of her stepmother, Julia Beverly. This episode has brought up a lot of listener questions, and I know that the three of us, Bob, Janet, and I, are all caught up on the podcast and looking forward to talking about it. But before we get into that, do we have any housekeeping?
We don't, and also you just ruined my first question. I was going to ask, did you guys listen to it?
I did. And I know Janet did because she said she did.
Did you listen to the first episode and get immediately hooked and binge all 4 of them?
Yes.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. So
for sure.
So first,
and then
of all,
I went back and listened to Murder in Illinois, which I had not listened to before. I like
a few people in the Facebook group said they immediately went and listened to that one. So it was really good too.
It's so compelling. Yeah, really, really compelling.
Yeah, Lauren's pretty amazing.
Oh,
Bob,
I absolutely
Bob's all right.
I love the way it's put together, and I always like that. I like that sound design, that like the somebody knows something kind of sound design.
Yeah,
that's where I felt like it was from, kind of, and I love that. I love it so much.
Yeah, I actually, so one of my students for their podcast for the investigative journalism class, one of the students is creating the music for that, and I actually told her, like, go listen to this podcast for you to understand the feel and the vibe of the music package that we need, because it was just, I loved it.
Yeah, it was so good.
Yeah.
And the case is so crazy. And like they say, I mean, not to get too far ahead, but like they said, kind of in there's a lot of bad facts that, like, you know, and you talk about there's always these coincidences, and there's a lot of bad facts so far that's been presented to us that I'm really interested to see where it goes from here.
So you guys are a little ahead of me, so I haven't listened to the 4th episode that dropped. Any big bombshells from the 4th episode?
I listened to it last week, or I listened to it, I guess, whenever I knew that that's who you were talking to. I listened to it, and then I did 50 shows for the festival, so I just re-listened to on a faster speed the first 3, and I was in the middle of listening to the 4th for a second time right before we started. So I'm trying to remember if are there bombshells in the 4th one? I'm sure someone in here.
Not really bombshells, but they talked about it. The 4th episode's about the sentencing, and they talked
Okay.
Yeah.
about a lot of that. And there was an advocate for the family that stood up and talked. I think it was an aunt, I think, if I remember correctly. And they brought up Christianity a lot and like focused on that a lot. And Bob posed the question, like, were they Wiccan? Was there something we're missing here? Because they kept posing like this question of like they're raised in Christianity, and
Right.
and Bob literally in the episode says, are they looking for witches? Like, and wrote it down.
Right.
So it's a strange.
Yeah, so I was wondering if they were going to come back around to, I know they are at some point coming back around to the person in the hoodie that that was seen across town or whatever, trying to break it out, whatever what he was doing. But they haven't gotten into that yet in episode 4.
Not yet.
So by the time you guys listeners hear this on Friday, I know I didn't include it in the questions, but somebody had asked when the next episode drops. They drop on Thursdays. So
okay.
So episode 5 will come out before the listeners hear this episode.
Cool.
Nice.
Okay.
One little bit of housekeeping. Someone just reminded me in the chat. Caitlin asked if I can have Bob Mata back on to talk about the new Delphi info. I mean, I'm cool with you. I feel like Bob's become a regular on here, and I love having him on. I don't want to burn all you guys out on it, but I haven't had a chance to listen. But all I know is they shared some info that the judge wouldn't allow to come in, like on their on him and Allie's podcast. And a lot of people are pretty, of course, there's still people who are like, F you, he's guilty. But I've seen a lot of people like, holy shit.
Well, I think there's like 4 major points like within the appeal that they're putting forward that they're really pushing. And one of them is the cell phone, that it was plugged in or not plugged in at some point. One of them is they found there is footage of Brad Weber coming home. There's actually a camera footage of him coming home, and it's not at the time that is relayed.
And they had that before the trial?
Sounds like it.
And the judge wouldn't allow it in?
Yeah, I could be speaking out of term here. I don't know whether they had it before or not, but it does sound like it.
Okay. And people were saying something about that there was somebody else that confessed.
I think there was something. There is that. I think there's that element too. And I know there's a lot of people pointing back to one of the original suspects was Ron Logan, who was since deceased. And I think there's a lot pointing. They're trying to point back to him again.
I'm so far behind on that because I haven't been able to catch any of their lives, and they usually take a minute to kind of roll that stuff out over into the podcast feed. So I keep seeing like tantalizing morsels about like a juror came forward and said something, and like I listened to a couple of their interviews with like Andy and Rosie. Like I listened to those, but those weren't really about bombshells or anything like that. It was more just kind of getting to know them and like, but it was really interesting. And the other defense attorney that they had, Jennifer I'm forgetting her name. Sorry.
I know there was a whole legal team there, but
yeah.
I'll reach out to Bob. I'm sure Bob will come on. And I'll say, I do already, we'll talk about the end of the episode. Do already have this week's episode is already recorded, and I am recording an episode on Friday. It'll be really cool. Another podcaster that's going to be coming out the following week.
Cool.
So if nothing else jumps out that we're going to do, because I mean, obviously, I think all 3 of us are pretty heavily invested in that case. And if there's more information coming out, I'd like to talk about it, and we'll share that work. So sorry, I didn't mean to derail from the conversation about this case. But we're talking about Bob Mata, and somebody just posted that in the chat that they wanted to have Bob back on. So
sure.
So we'll probably do that. Anything else you guys want to touch on before we get into listener stuff?
So I know there's a listener thing in about it. The Brandon kind of had the same feeling I did, but it really reminded me of the Sandy Melgar case.
Yeah.
There was a lot of that where the police just honed in on her because she happened to be the person home, the person available at the time, rather than looking at any evidence, just like, well, this is the person easily accessible, so we're going to go with that.
Yeah. It seemed like, like I said, I have no doubt that if Bob and Laura have a question about this conviction, that there's a lot more coming out. And you guys heard me in the episode. I said, like, I'm not listening to this thinking, well, she must be innocent because they're saying so. As a matter of fact, like after 3 episodes, I'm like, this is really interesting, but also she's guilty, right? Like it seems like, so like I'm super interested to hear on, what else comes out. I still have an open mind about everything, but yeah, obviously, and I don't think it was their intention to convince you in the first 3 episodes of her innocence.
Right.
Well, and they really haven't touched on. I mean, they're touching on things, but they really haven't touched on why she may be innocent. They're talking about the timeline at this point, and the fact that she left, she went to the gas station, realized she didn't have her credit cards, and then return home, and she does throw something out at the gas station.
Right.
And you know, they have said that it's a small palm-sized bag, whatever, but just the idea that she really did go to the gas station, really did throw something away,
right,
and then return home. I mean, it looks really bad,
especially when she said she went to Walmart.
Yeah,
and then they see her actually leaving, going to a gas station and throwing something. There's, like I said in the episode, is like, you know, wrongful convictions are always full of coincidences. If it wasn't for the coincidences, there wouldn't be wrongful convictions. But like you can see it from what we've heard so far. It's like, well, that doesn't look good at all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I have questions after listening to it the second time that I'm sure will be answered. To your point, it's very, very clear that Lauren and Bob, I don't know how much of the crafting of the episodes that Bob does, because he's got so much going on too. And I know Lauren to be a very skilled storyteller as well as Bob is, but I'm just saying, like, because she sort of brings you into meeting Bob as her experience of like seeing him for the first time and stuff, it feels still like it's kind of from her perspective. But there's so much that, you know, she's very good at, you know, alluding to stuff and saying, you know, we were saying this when we were at the location. Of course, that would come back to haunt us later, you know. So, you know, and even in the interview with you, Bob, that the two of them did together, that, you know, they're holding cards close to the chest, and they're really being very thoughtful about the way they roll out the information. But it does feel like there's a lot coming. That being said, they do lay out a lot of stuff that is not necessarily like implicates her to me, but feel like huge questions that if it were you telling the story, I know that you would anticipate all of the Truth and Justice Army being like, hold up.
Yeah.
Like, you need to answer this now. You've put out this thing, so we need to be able to ask this follow-up question, because it's such an obvious follow-up question that it's almost concerning that it doesn't get addressed right away. But I feel like that's intentional with this type of storytelling. Is like, no, actually, we're not going to answer that right away. But we'll get to it, kind of thing.
Right. And it's funny because you were talking about, you know, the Truth and Justice audience. Susan in the live chat said, Bob, this is the way I feel, or this is how I feel at the beginning of each season of Truth and Justice, which is, you know, because I kind of do the same thing. I try to, a lot of it is in an attempt to not be, you know, it's a linear way to tell the story of like, this is the evidence that was used. This is how the person was convicted first, and then talk about the gaps in it. But also it's an attempt to kind of avoid the bias of just coming in and be like, this person is innocent because of this, and this.
Right.
Now let me tell you the bullshit case that the prosecutors had. And we try not to do it that way and lay it out like, you know, so yeah, I feel, and that's exactly why when I'm listening to it, you know, I'm trying to be honest about it, say like, I'm not convinced that this person is innocent, but also I know that there's more to come, and I'm just keeping an open mind to see what comes next.
Right.
Which is the piece I hope everybody does with Truth and Justice, is keep an open mind, be objective.
Yeah. So a couple of things that I wrote down, I actually don't see them fully, like one specifically, I don't see represented by questions from the audience. So maybe the people in the chat and the two of you can help clarify this, because I also might be like talking all this smack about how there's this big open-ended question that's sitting out there. Maybe I just missed it both times that I listened, or maybe they get into it in the fourth episode and I just had forgotten and haven't caught up to that yet. But where I'm confused is, unless I'm mistaken, I thought the first time we heard anything about this person being so close to Julie that he cut her as he was leaving, I feel like the only time we hear about that is when Bob Mata is recounting his personal conversation with Julie. But she called 911. Like, so they haven't laid out like what she told police in terms of that attack.
I think
so.
You're
I
right.
just thought I was like so taken aback by like, wait, really? You guys aren't going to address this right away? That she apparently had a cut on her hand that I'm sure people who think she's guilty are like, well, that's a defensive wound. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or like whatever. No, I was just very taken aback by that. Like, that seems like a huge piece of information that we have not heard about anywhere else except for Bob Mata's conversation with her.
Yeah, and I think that only came out on our podcast, right? They haven't covered that yet.
No,
they covered it on 3. I think it's episode 3.
I do think they talk about
that she had
when
the
he
defensive
goes to
wounds.
visit her.
Yeah. So, but I think that's kind of the way they're playing it, right? Is they're waiting. I don't think we've heard the evidence of her innocence yet. So I
Right.
think they're just kind of like foreshadowing, like it's kind of put a pin in this. She had cuts in her hand.
Right.
Or arm. Didn't they say arm or did they say hand?
They said hand. They said back of the hands.
Back of the hands. Yeah.
As I believe what I remember.
Yeah. So I assume that I can't imagine we're not going to get more on that later.
Yeah, and then same, similar with the whole kind of intruder thing. They lay out some groundwork of like that maybe this one person did see someone, maybe that's the same person that Julie saw. There was this potential other 911 call, but we don't have a lot of detail on that yet, and they didn't see anyone on cameras or whatever. So you have that sort of laid out there in this very tantalizing way, but there's so many, loose ends that I'm sure will be tying up one by one.
Yeah. And I think part of that is too, I think of when I'm putting stuff together in those early episodes of a season where the thing is, like for me, I've been doing this for 10 years. We're on our 16th season. I understand how people react when they're listening and how some people will just, it's like once they make their mind up, not everybody, but there are people that once they make their mind up, they just can't come off of it. They will refuse to accept any new information. So I tend to do that too. Even when I'm laying out the prosecution's case, I might just pepper in, but so this person testified to this and this, but we're going to get into this later, but that's not the story, where you're kind of letting, I'm trying to let people know ahead of time, like, don't make your mind up yet. There's more coming about this. I wonder if it's some of that. It's like, they just want to let you know because think about it. If they didn't share the information about like, the guy dressed in the black hoodie that was caught in the other 911 call, if they didn't share that in those first couple of episodes, everything you would have heard up to this point is she's guilty, she's guilty, she's guilty, she's guilty, she's guilty. Right. And then there is a certain percentage of the audience that's going to decide she's guilty that are not going to accept anything else that comes after that. So I think I think that's probably why the open-ended questions are in there, is because they're just they're peppering in a little bit to let you know there's more coming. There's coming.
Yeah, it works. Yeah. It works. I mean, it really makes something,
Mm-hmm.
It makes you want to binge something without a doubt. Well, let's get into some of these great comments and questions. And obviously I think most people know we're doing the follow-up, not Bob and Lauren. So they're not necessarily like trying to get us to find answers to this thing that we are not doing. So, but I think they're really interesting conversation topics. So starting with Julie, not to be too confusing, since Julie is also the name of the person at the center of the podcast. Julie says Bob Ruff mentioned that he was on the fence after. Well, this is not verbatim, right? Because this is
right.
Sort of okay. So speaking broadly, Julie's saying Bob Ruff mentioned he was on the fence after the first 4 episodes. She's already leaning towards Julie being innocent. No motive, as we understand it. The investigation led by a policewoman who had never done a murder case before or since, as a suspicious person cited who matched Julie's description of the attacker. The list goes on. Do you want to expound on what you just said, which was like sort of being on the fence and feeling like some of that stuff was not a great look for her? Do you feel like we've already covered that with Zach and kind of what we were just talking about?
Kind of. I just think at this point, I haven't heard anything, as I kind of explained when I was talking to Bob and Lauren. When we're screening cases, I'm looking for like, where are the holes? Where's the information that's kind of falling apart? I just haven't heard anything yet that leads me to believe that evidence is irrelevant, while still at the same time, keeping an open mind that stuff may come. But if I'm being completely objective and honest about what I've heard so far, everything I've heard so far, while there's not really evidence behind it, but there's plenty of circumstantial evidence around it. A lot of it, and I know we have questions about this, a lot of it having to do with the location where this happened too.
Right. Well, yeah. In fact, that's another thing that Julie pointed out. She says, do we know if Julie saw a vehicle when she arrived home? Bob, Mata, and Lauren made a point of how rural the house was. So I'm wondering how the alleged attacker was able to get away before the police arrived, if there was no vehicle. And Erica, along the same line, said that after looking at the location on a map, she just feels it's kind of hard to believe that someone could get very far without a vehicle.
Yeah, and that's part of what has me leaning towards guilt is, at this point, again, I want to keep stressing this from what I've heard so far is, they're out in the middle of nowhere. They would have had to have a car. And it seems like in that area, when you look at the map of where it's at, I think of a lot like almost like my neighborhood. Like if there's another car anywhere near this house, I'm gonna know it. Like it's gonna be out of place. I'm gonna recognize it because there's not very many houses down here. So like I know my 4 neighbors' vehicles. So like whose car is this? And it doesn't seem like they could have gotten away anywhere on foot. So it's like where would they didn't notice a car? Nobody saw a car. She didn't see a car. Yeah, so that's definitely one that I'm waiting to hear more answers about.
Yeah, for sure. And I think also just in terms of like the search, we don't know yet, other than that they've sort of laid out for us, like, get ready because we are going to show you problems with this investigation,
Yeah.
right? Perhaps across the board. And like Erica wants to know, if there was a search done by the police for an intruder after what Julie said she saw, like, what was the forensic investigation of the house itself like? If they even, like, did that get contaminated? How was there any evidence, or are we going to find out that there was any potential evidence at all of a person being there who wasn't a member of the family, etc.?
I don't know about in the house itself, but my understanding is they never gave any validity to the idea that there was a mass perpetrator that ran away. So I don't think they ever went out and started canvassing and searching for this armed intruder that ran away because they dismissed her story immediately, is the way it sounds to me.
Which, I mean, seems easy to do. That's not that it's the right thing to do, but it seems easy to do, right? If you're being questioned and you did it, your first thing is to try to throw it somewhere else.
Right.
And you're like, I don't know. It was a guy in a hoodie that I didn't see that ran down the road.
Right.
It's an easy story to come up with that they can't.
Yeah. And I wonder if the geography of it played into that too. So like, cops pull up in this very remote area where there's nobody around and, there's no real good access to it. And she's like, yeah, I came home and somebody, met me at the door and attacked me with a knife and then ran away. And you're looking around like, what the heck? No, they didn't,
Right.
and also, why they came to just target and kill a 12-year-old girl.
Yeah.
What? I mean, I think the story sounded odd enough that they just dismissed it. And then also I think there's an element of tunnel vision here, particularly if she is innocent. I mean, I think they locked it just like they did with Sandy Milgar. They locked into her and they just never looked anywhere else.
Yeah. Tool girl, I see you in the chat mentioning also that is something that comes up when Lauren is speaking to Julie, as she goes by, her family. And I believe was it her mom, Renee, who said that she spoke to Mike,
Yes.
the dad in question, who told her that he thought that it was a suicide. And that's like all kind of hearsay at this point, right? Like we only have one family member saying that Mike said that that she took her own life. Like just in fairness to like truth, we just don't know. We would just have to take her at her word so far that
Right.
is something that Mike said. So it's hard to know if that's what that means, but it's very curious. That's a very intriguing tidbit that, they sprinkle in there that again leaves you wondering, well, why would you think that? And why would, how, and also in keeping with that same part of the story is her saying that like Mike never asked about where Julie was or didn't know and hadn't connected with her right after all of this happened, which seems like the number one thing that you would do. So all of that, however much of it is true, is extremely interesting and a little strange sounding, right?
Yeah. I don't know the answers to those questions yet till we hopefully hear more.
So basically, this is just like a little fun echo chamber for us to all talk about how juicy and interesting this story is. And I do not mean to be too lighthearted about it by saying it's juicy. I'm just saying we're all very much intrigued by it and very, very interested in hearing more. Jennifer says she needs to understand how police and prosecutors get away with claiming things with zero evidence, such as Julia throwing away clothes and the murder weapon in the trash at a busy gas station with no evidence of that actually happening, since they never recovered any such items.
Well, it's not that there's no evidence. There's no direct evidence. So circumstantial evidence can and is used all the time. So that's all up for the finder of fact, which is the jurors, to decide if that evidence is relevant. So it's not like I wouldn't say there is no evidence she did that. They have a theory that she did that, and then they have a video of her going to a gas station throwing something away. And then they're hoping that the jury will connect those dots and decide, well, that was her throwing stuff away. But then you have obviously, like I said, they said it was a small, very small palm size bag that she throws away. But the other thing that I don't know that I'm hoping we learn later is how big was the knife, right? Based on the autopsy. So like, say there's, the stab wounds are all 3 inches deep. Well, it could be a pocket knife that folds up and it's this big,
She said, yeah. I think Julie told in the episode, when Bob Mata is visiting her, she said that it was like more like a kitchen knife. It wasn't like a retractable knife because he even said, is it like a knife that could have been taken from your kitchen? And Julie said it could be, which then of course opens up the next question, which is, well, was there a knife found to be missing in the kitchen?
Right. But then also too, that is based on the story she's telling of the intruder attacking her on the way out,
Right.
which, we don't know if that's true or not.
Right. You want to know the forensics of like the cut,
so
the size, all of that, like the hard facts. Sure.
Yeah. So think back to like the Kiao Gove case where we took the measurements of every stab. It was like, well, this one went in 7 inches and it was, a 2-inch tear in the skin. So you're thinking like a big chef's knife type of thing as opposed to it's a 1/2 inch and goes in 2 inches deep.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and it's hard to understand too, because first of all, we haven't seen the video. We haven't seen a still of the video. We don't know actually how big that bag is.
Right.
We hear it's palm size. We don't actually know how big the bag is.
Right.
But they do have evidence. They have video of her throwing something away.
Yeah.
So just because they've never found anything. So you can't say that, yes, this was bloody clothes, a murder weapon, whatever. But that's how you can convince a jury, right? We have footage of her throwing an item away. Period.
Exactly. And I think the point I'm making is that it's not, I don't think that's an unreasonable theory to present to the jurors.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then also, and a lot of it all comes down to hypotheticals that we don't know too. Like we're like, so say it was a knife that could be folded. And then they're saying, well, she got rid of all the clothes. Well, we don't know that the clothes had blood on them. What did any clothes have to be thrown away? We don't know that.
Right.
It's assumed that they get, but it's not like people always tend to go back to what they see on TV where they're, the killer stabbing somebody and we get the shot of the blood spattering up on their face while they're doing it. It's if somebody's clothed and being stabbed with a knife plunged into them, it's not spurting blood. Now if they slit their throat and cut their carotid artery, then yeah, there's going to be spurting of blood that's happening, but it's not necessarily an absolute fact from what I've heard so far that the killer would have had blood on their clothes. So it could have just been as simple as a folding knife in a bag that goes and gets thrown away.
Yeah.
Is a possibility.
Boy, I mean, it really just, I know we always say this, but it just really makes you think, what did I do in a day that was so mindless and so unimportant that it was almost not even worth remembering that could then be turned into a huge deal? Like, I sort of had that thought as I was walking in here in San Francisco, going to a show and having so much to do and so many things to keep track of, and remembering that I had forgotten my script for a show and dramatically stopped in the middle of a crosswalk. You know what I mean? As a car's trying to turn left and I'm in the crosswalk and I stop, I'm realizing I don't have it. And then I abruptly turn around, run back across the street and go back up and who cares? You know what I mean? But but if something happened, all of a sudden, if that's on camera, people are like, oh my God, she must have forgotten the murder weapon was inside the house. You know what I'm saying? It's just so crazy to imagine those little things it was annoying that I got all the way to that point, hypothetically, and realized that I didn't even have my cards with me and didn't have gas. But at least when I had to turn around, I could get rid of the dirty diapers. It's such a mundane, if that's in fact what happened, what a mundane, harmless thing. It just, again, we always talk about with the wrongful convictions, especially like, what are those little moments where some people are like, well, they must have the worst luck in the world. And we often say, yeah, like
Yeah.
a little bit of that, a little sprinkle of this, like there's a recipe there that you see a lot of consistent ingredients.
Yeah. So so a couple things from that. One is, as I said on the podcast, imagine if she never gave that police interview and directed them to the gas station. If she
Which
hadn't,
she didn't. It was her mom
but
that
she told
called.
them to,
Mhm.
Yeah,
because once
thinking
you
like
find
that's helpful.
so the first interview she gave without an attorney, where she gave the Walmart story, if she hadn't done that, and then the second one, if they didn't skirt around the lawyer, if they'd done what they should do, which is tell the lawyer that and let the lawyer figure out what to do with it, then all of that evidence doesn't come in. Side note, when it comes down to some of the things that makes me feel uneasy about the case is having been a parent of 4 kids. How long are you driving around with a dirty
I
diaper in
know.
your car?
I know.
Like you just decide all of a sudden, like, when was that diaper from? Like, how
Mhm.
long has it been there? That's a weird
Right.
thing. I mean, not that, I mean, I'm very meticulous about my car too, so that's, it's not everybody's different, but that just jumped out at me as like, you've been carrying around a dirty diaper for how many days before you're gonna go
But if
throw it
it's
away?
just pee, it's, you know what I mean? If it's a little bit of pee.
Yeah, but so often if you're changing your kid in the car, which happens, I've done it myself, you're pulling over somewhere. It's not like you're just pulling on the side of the road to change a diaper and you have no place to dispose of it. You're
Yeah.
pulling over into a gas station, into a parking lot, somewhere that you probably could dispose of it rather than just chuck it in your back seat.
Right.
Yeah. No, that's, I mean, and also, by the way, I don't have children, so I'm the absolute worst person to say what a behavior would be when it comes to something like that.
Yeah, I just usually, if I'm stopped somewhere changing a diaper, I'm throwing that diaper out immediately.
Mhm.
I'm not putting it in my car. But that's anecdotal. But that's just one of the things that I have rolling around in my head about it.
Yeah. Well, Mike mentioned that, he's, again, doing the same thing we're all doing, which is wondering if there's what info is going to be out there. Maybe info that was presented at trial that hasn't yet been on the podcast, and is just sort of wondering this early in the game how a defense attorney could go about challenging a conviction that was based solely on a narrative without actual evidence. Like, sometimes the lack of a thing is what gets you in trouble. Like, if there's no DNA to test, then an innocence project won't or can't get involved and stuff like
Right.
that. So, again, Mike agreed that we're waiting for so much to be rolled out for us to kind of wrap our heads around.
Yeah, it's tough because you end up in a position where I would think of things as like positive or negative, right? So in a lot of wrongful conviction cases, you're trying to present a negative, like show something they did is not accurate, something they did is not true. There was a Brady violation, or there's a test that result we didn't get, or something like that, as opposed to a case like this where you got to put together positive or new evidence, right? I think you're going to have to prove someone else did it, because how do you disprove things that are based on theory? Like I see, like Jennifer, reiterated again in the chat that, but no bloody clothes or weapon were found. Yeah, I agree with that, but there was an effort made to find it. And again, I'm not saying that she's guilty. I'm not saying that's what it was. I'm just saying that it's not an unreasonable argument where you're like, where did the murder weapon go? And they're like, oh, here's a video of her going to a gas station right after the time the murder would have happened, throwing something away in a trash can. It's reasonable to ask the jury to infer that that was the murder weapon.
It's reasonable to ask the jury to do that, but from what we have come to understand about police investigations, and even in situations where, we've listened to other podcasts where it seems like there's compelling evidence, but a different type of police officer, a detective, a different type of prosecutor would say, yes, that was really compelling up until we couldn't find anything to shore up what we were saying that getting rid of that was.
Yeah, but I think that,
And then we had, you know what I'm saying? Like,
but I think that's more of a strong argument if it's, we went and dug through that trash can and it wasn't in there. I think it's less of a strong argument if the can's been emptied into a dumpster and taken to a landfill, and they're like, we couldn't find, in this giant landfill, we couldn't find the bag that contained the murder weapon. So I just think that would be less impactful to a jury, as
Right.
opposed to, we saw her throw something away in that trash can and we went right there and
Of
looked in that
course.
trash can, and what we're saying was in there wasn't in there. because the fact that it would be pretty much impossible to find it. I think it's easier to convince a jury to make that inference.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, and I think Bob makes that point. At some point when they were digging for stuff, the police did find a shower curtain, and they did find kitchen utensils, including a knife. Now, that was completely struck down, but the jury had already heard that.
Right.
And he talks about that. He says you can take the skunk out of the jury box, but you can't remove the smell.
Yeah. You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube.
Yeah. So that's exactly, I mean, that could be a big thing right there, is they didn't happen to have anything to do with them, but they found a shower curtain and a knife and said it out loud.
Right. Well, that's just like,
you're going to find everything of everything at a dump or a landfill from somewhere.
It reminds me of the Pinyon Pines case where they're like, well, there was a Vans footprint on there and Robert owned a pair of Vans shoes.
Right.
Like, okay, it's a different pair of Vans shoes. The prints don't match. The size doesn't match, but they didn't present that. They just presented it as, so don't get me wrong. I'm not sitting here like leaning into like, this is how I know she's guilty. I'm just saying, as far as the discussion goes,
for sure,
how that gets presented to a jury and what's reasonable and what's not. I think it's a reasonable argument to make, and that's going to be up for the jury to decide. And I can absolutely see why a juror would be compelled by that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. Just a side note, our wonderful listeners who are in the chat, no surprises here, but we have many people who very quickly weighed in to say, like Lauren, I've totally stopped to change a diaper where I can't throw it away and left the bag in the car. This is normal, especially for busy moms. Many people in the chat are echoing that, saying, I've absolutely stopped in a place where I couldn't throw something away. My husband is very bad at it. It could be that had just happened, and then you forgot to take him out with you when you got out of the car. Next time you get in the car was that moment. You realize, like, oh, I left these in here. Like, at least I can throw these away.
Yeah, and like I said, it's all anecdotal because, like, I know, like, I'm so particular about the inside of my car. Like, literally every time I pull into my garage, I gather any scrap of trash that might be in there and throw it away in the trash can in the garage because I just can't stand to have trash in my car. Yeah. But I'm weird like that.
People be different. Yeah.
Yeah.
On the topic of legal challenges, this is not necessarily specific to this episode, but Chris is just very shocked that there is no exact definition for reasonable doubt. Not the first time that's come up for us. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that today, Bob?
Yeah, I think because this is a good thing that it got brought up when I did my closing arguments for Jody's case. And I don't think we ever really addressed it on the follow-up because people were saying that what I said in my closing argument about reasonable doubt is not accurate, where I said that it's a doubt with reason when a reason behind it when I presented my closing argument. First of all, like, the reason I said that is because I've sat through 2 jury trials as a juror. In both times, that's the exact way that the defense attorneys presented reasonable doubt to me. But the problem is it's very open. Like, the law doesn't, I think somebody even on Chris's commented, like, sent a link for the definition of reasonable doubt. And if you read through that, it's still unclear. There's so much wiggle room in what is reasonable. It is such an odd, like, and I don't know how you fix it, right? Like, I don't know how you put a number on it or put something on it where you can say, well, if it doesn't meet this threshold, then it's considered reasonable. And so I always liked the way it was described to me by those defense attorneys when I was in those jury boxes. I was like, listen, if you doubt the person, the difference to me is if you're just sitting up here and it's like, I just don't think they're guilty. That's not reasonable. That's not a reasonable doubt. It's just a doubt. But if I'm like, I don't think they're guilty because of this, this, and this, then now my doubt has a reason behind it based on the evidence presented at trial. But that is not like the textbook definition of reasonable doubt. In that episode, I was playing the defense attorney. My job was to convince you to vote not guilty, and that's how I would do it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So for our last question, Jennifer says she feels like Julia is likely innocent, but the idea of a masked man killing Jade seems crazy. She assumes we'll find out more later in the podcast, but her question is, and it's a very good one, what is the motive for anyone to murder an 11-year-old girl?
And that's the big one for me, that I have a really hard time, without any further information yet, believing the alternate suspect theory, because exactly that. Why would someone go to that remote location break into that house in the short window when nobody's home, but the 11-year-old girl is home. But I don't know how they would know that. And then go inside, and there's no robbery that we're aware of. There's no sexual assault that we're aware of. And just decide, I'm going to go into this house and stab and kill this young girl. My other problem with it is, if they're in that empty house with the intent to kill her, which appears to be the case, why are they wearing a mask? Why would you wear a mask in that situation, right? You're going in to a house that has nothing but a single 11-year-old girl in it with the intention of killing her, which means there's no witness. Why wear a mask? So I have problems with that. And then the big one is just like you said, the motive. Like, this, to me, this almost has to be a personal cause homicide. It cannot. I can't wrap my brain around, at this point, with the information that we have to this point, why a random person comes in and does this. It doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I feel like they've got to be holding on to some I feel like there's some bombshells coming.
Yeah, and Tony,
I feel like that we're gonna get a lot more guidance on that.
Yeah, and counter to what I just said, Tony just said in the chat, could be in case of home cameras. That, yeah. So there you go. That could be a reason. If they thought there could be cameras, maybe that makes sense to wear a mask. So there are reasons. There's obviously other situations, but those are my hang-ups.
Right.
Well, and like you said too, I mean, it's a small window of time for this person to enter the house, commit this crime, and leave. There's a very small window of opportunity for this.
Yeah.
So unless you're going to do that, you're not just stumbling upon that house to do that.
Yeah. And Lauren in the chat says, but to that extent, why would Julia? What motive would she have? And I don't know, but statistically speaking, instances of a parent or step parent getting angry at a kid and killing them, comparative to a random stranger breaking in and murdering a child like that, is so lopsided. It's I don't know. I don't have numbers in front of me, but I would have to bet it's 1,000 to 1 when that happens. Like parents get triggered, family members get triggered and kill somebody in their family a hell of a lot more often than random strangers break into a house for no apparent reason and murder a child.
How often do those parents stab the child?
I don't know. I mean, I don't even have just a number to give you.
Yeah, but you know what I mean? Like, that's interesting. Once you start breaking down the statistics like that, then you start wanting to take into account every single element of the crime. And it becomes very interesting to see, like, sort of how those numbers shake out. Because it's sort of hard for me to imagine someone getting angry at a child and then stabbing them repeatedly with a knife. But I could be totally off on that. Well, you know what this reminds me of real quick? For anyone who knows, this also kind of reminds me of that case with the two brothers, remember? And one brother is in prison. Maybe he's out now, but he was homesick and his brother came home, and then his story was someone just ran inside, stabbed his brother to death, and then left for no reason, like in this very small window. And police were like, why would that happen? Who would do that in this tiny period of time? Like, it's a really, really interesting case. And this guy's family has stood by him the entire time, but there were a lot of bad facts in there. Like, the knife that would have caused that was very similar to like a knife that his dad had brought home, and then they found a knife buried in the ground or in the snow or something. Anyway, I'm sure some of you have followed this case and know what I'm talking about, but it's very similar in the sense of, like, it's a family member, there's a very tiny window, and you find yourself asking the question, like, who would this other person be? Because it's the same situation of, like, just zipping in very quickly, doing this horrible thing and then leaving, and there being absolutely no, like, according to the police, evidence of that person existing.
Yeah. And to your
that's right. The brother, the case that was also represented initially by Christina Gutierrez. Thank you, Lynn. That's exactly right. Gutierrez was, and Gutierrez seemingly exploited them for money. So there is a connection to Adnan's case. Thank you. That's exactly right, Lynn.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that one. To the point about the knife, when you asked like as far as like a family member how often they would use a knife and stab them to death, I would expect that more than any other weapon, because in a situation like that where it's like something escalates, I think the murder weapon oftentimes would be, I would think it would be something, a weapon of opportunity. What's fun and what's in everybody's home are knives, right?
Sure.
That's something that's easily accessible. And you can imagine an argument that escalates. Somebody, I think Lynn in the chat even mentioned like it could be like the child gets a knife out and and it escalates and then it gets turned on them. Like there's a million scenarios that you could think of. But yeah, I'm just, the other thing that Bob and Lauren hinted at was that there's some issues with the timeline, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah.
And they kind of hinted that the timeline isn't the way they said the timeline is.
So they talk about it a little bit. They talk about the time to the gas station, and it's a very minute change. It's 6 to 7 minutes, and I think they said it took them about 9.5 minutes. That's about the only timeline I can think of.
Yeah,
I missed
well,
something.
it's that she didn't call 911 until what they believed to be
Right.
over half an hour from when she must have gotten home, based on the timestamp of the gas station video, I think.
Yeah.
So it's yet another way that gas station video ended up being such a huge part of their case against her when they're the one that told her about it.
Right. And I think they suggested that later on we're going to hear more about the timeline.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, super interesting. I'm definitely going to be continuing to listen to Murder on Songbird Road. I'm sure most of you will too. Very good. And based on a lot of all the emails and messages I got, I'll probably reach out to Bob and see if he wants to come back and talk about these new developments in the Delphi case. That's a obsession of mine and Zach's and Janet's, and there's more information out there. So we'll see if we can get Bob to come on and do that. This weekend, we have a really cool guest coming out on Sunday. She works for an organization and helped found an organization that offers doula services to women in prison, which is like really cool. And the conversation is fascinating. Like when she told me, and you'll hear all these stats and stuff on Sunday, how many births happen in prison with incarcerated people in prison, just in the state of Minnesota where she's at. It's staggering. I never thought
we have one in this case.
Yeah, it happened right in this case, and that was kind of so she had written to me, and then I had talked to Bob and Lauren, and was like, oh, like this just came up, and what an interesting thing to talk about. So they're doing some great work. We're going to hear from her on Sunday. And then next week, we're going to hear from CJ from Rainbow Crimes about the work that they're doing in the space, talking about crimes that happen or against LGBTQI plus. Did I get all those right?
A is usually in there too, but yeah.
Yeah. So it's their podcast is all about crimes against that community. And they're doing really great work. So that's what's coming up next week. So there's your next couple of weeks, what we got going on. We're still working on our next season. We're kind of waiting for that final green light from the attorneys in that case to start conducting interviews. So hopefully we'll have a little more information on that coming up soon. And with all that being said, thanks guys for listening. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for being in the live chat, asking questions, and we'll talk to you guys next week.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Right. Man, what a great close. Remember how last week I completely shit the bed on the close?
It was a good one.
Yeah, I really ramped up for this one. Cool. So same bat time, same bat channel.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Next week. Yeah, and then Janet, anytime that you have Wednesdays free, let us know, because this.
Okay.
Yeah, it is nice. I mean, it's like I said, it's a rush right after school, but now I'm looking at the clock. I'm like, it's 5 o'clock, and I'm done working for the day.
There you go.
This is really nice.
This is great. So thanks everybody in the YouTube chat. I'm going to end this live stream, and you guys hang out for a second.
Okay.
Bye guys. Bye live stream.